Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. And a warm welcome to the afternoon show. I'm Bill Arnold. And can the flood mentioned in Genesis be proven? Of course, I think we all know the answer to that, but we're going to find out for sure today. My guest, Helmut Welk, is here with me in studio. He is a recently retired engineering manager with a Fortune 100 company. He has a BS and MS degrees in industrial engineering from the University of Illinois and has held positions in a variety of national and international assignments. He's also the president of the Quad City Creation Science Association. I like scientists because they're awfully smart people, and we're going to have a lively discussion with Helmut today. Welcome to the studio. Nice to have you in studio.
Thank you, Bill. Glad to be here.
My favorite guest is when they're right here in studio, and I can look at them in the eye and ask the tough questions. So I want to first find out a little bit about the Quad City Creation Science Association. And right before we started, you said you moved to Nashville. So tell me more.
Okay. Well, about 15 years ago, some other friends of mine in different churches, different denominations, we all accept the Bible as truth. And as we looked around, we realized that science, modern science, has really made Darwinism impossible. If you look at genetics and the evidence in the fossil record still isn't there. So we wanted to get some of the word out because there were so many good materials out there. And so we formed a local group called the Quad City Creation Science Association. And for 15 years, we did 6 or 7 programs a year, plus a conference in a variety of churches and schools and even the public libraries. So we just want to get the word out locally and bring good scientists in as speakers, and then some of us became speakers. Did that for 15 years, but last fall, my wife and I, we moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and we have all six of our grandchildren are in Nashville area. So that was our good reasons for moving.
No further questions. We've got a winner.
Yep. And then, of course, I transitioned out of the Quad City Creation Science Association. The vice president took over as president. He just recently gave his own presentation, and then they have other speakers coming in. And we are in the process now of forming a Tennessee Creation Fellowship based in the Nashville area.
And there are plenty of people for you to connect to in that area. Have you already identified them? And
yeah, we've already found at least a dozen people that God led us to through various means and then various connections. And the door seems to be opening wide for us just to walk through. And we have our first event scheduled for next Thursday.
Oh, fantastic. Now, Helmut, I know that there's evidence of there's an abundance of global flood stories, isn't there? From all societies and anthropologists all around the world.
Every culture has a flood story, and it's amazing how some of the details of those stories that have survived over time match the biblical account. But the biblical account gives us a more complete story and has all of the details. But, even the Aboriginals of Australia, when they encountered missionaries, they said, wait a minute, we have this story of a flood. A father and 3 sons survived a big flood in a canoe or something like that. And, they didn't have some of the other details, and they called it a canoe.
It's a big
canoe. It was a father and 3 sons.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. All right, let's talk. Let's start into this discussion. I know you're going to provide us with all kinds of your evidence and your discovery, but let's maybe do a review of evidence for a worldwide flood, because I know there's plenty of it.
There is plenty of it. What I'm going to do in a talk later today, but is just to remind folks that we live in a culture that doesn't want to accept a worldwide flood for 2 reasons. The first one being is that it's a reminder that God judges sin. That was the point of the flood. Thoughts and intentions of men was evil continually, the Bible tells us. And so he had to bring a flood of judgment And that kind of hit the reset button on the entire earth. He says, I will destroy them with the earth. And the other reason is if you understand the flood and the flood geology, then you don't need millions of years. A worldwide flood washes away millions and billions of years when you look at the rock layers and understand them in light of flood geology and the sediments and all the dead things in them from top to bottom. So those two reasons, they don't want to be reminded of sin, and then our culture just refuses to give up on millions and billions of years, because without that, all of Darwinism vanishes.
Okay.
And that's an alternative worldview. But as I mentioned, the reason we form local groups, and like here in the Twin Cities, you have Twin City Creation Science Association. They've been around for 40 years, just trying to get the word out that real science confirms the flood, confirms creation, and the biblical account of our origins.
All right. Helmut Welk is my guest, and he is discussing today the flood that's mentioned in Genesis, and we're also going to talk about the evidence supporting a worldwide flood. And I appreciate your opening remarks, Helmut, saying people don't want to talk about the sin that was in the world that God had to do something about. And of course, if you eliminate Darwinism, that's going to cause a lot of people to clutch for their pearls, isn't it?
Yeah, it'll cause a lot of heartburn and anguish and anger. And so often many times you can question Darwinism. Some people have accepted that people do question it. Scientists around the world do. It's not just an American thing. I travel in Europe quite a bit, and I know European scientists who, based on their own field of science, do not accept Darwinism, but rather the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we realize that, it really is a worldwide thing in terms of understanding the rocks, and the rocks do wash away millions of years. So if you can question Darwinism a little bit, say the evidence isn't there, the fossils are kind of sparse when it comes to transitional forms. But if you question millions and billions of years, people get angry, they get emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the rub really comes in, especially on a worldwide flood, because then you interpret the rocks without billions of years.
Okay. Now I got lots of questions, but I want to hear more of your teaching. But let's start with the notion, and correct me if I'm completely off, but is about 75% of the Earth's land surface is comprised of sedimentary rock?
Of the land surface?
Yes.
Well, almost all of the land surface is sedimentary rock. What is it? 70% roughly of the surface of the entire Earth is water.
Okay.
And a lot of it is very deep water. So, we've got a planet that's predominantly water, and people say, oh, there's no evidence for a worldwide flood. And yet, astronomers and NASA scientists admit and even promote the fact that there was a flood on Mars. Because just looking through the telescopes, we see a gigantic canyon, much bigger than Grand Canyon on Earth. And they say the only way that could have happened is with water carving it. And so even though the surface of Mars has no water today, they admit to and even talk about a worldwide flood on a planet that has no water. But here on Earth, where we have lots of water, oh no, there couldn't have been a worldwide flood.
Okay. I would like to ask a couple questions before we get back into, I know some of the material you've prepared for your presentation tonight, which I'm fascinated. I want to hear all of it. But when I read Genesis chapter 1, and it starts, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. What do you say is the condition of the earth at that point? Formless and empty? Was there land mass that was there?
Well, if you read it carefully,
okay,
you never hear about land or anything other than water until you get to day 3.
Okay.
So Russ Humphreys, he's an award-winning physicist, grew up as an atheist, but then in grad school, started coming to Bible studies, became a Christian. And a lot of what drove him was the fact that as he studied magnetic fields of Earth and the planets, it fit a young Earth. That he did the calculations. We know we've been measuring the strength of the magnetic field of the Earth for 120 plus years. It is declining and declining rapidly. And the only thing that can generate that is a liquid iron core that spins. And if you go backwards, if the magnetic field was stronger, well, then the temperature internal to the Earth would be hotter and hotter and hotter going backwards, and to the point that it would make life on the surface impossible. Mm-hmm. So Dr. Humphreys says very comfortably, based on his physics, that the maximum age of the Earth, based on our magnetic field, is about 10,000 years. Mm-hmm. And as I look around, when people ask me, what do you think the age of the Earth is? Well, my answer is, that's a good question. But did you know there's maybe 90 to 100 different ways to measure the age of the Earth, and 95% of them all indicate it cannot be millions and billions of years old? Magnetic field decay is one of them.
Mm-hmm. So,
then he gets into, and I introduced Dr. Humphreys because I like his theory on the first 4 days of creation. If you read that carefully, all you hear about is water. And the Earth is formless and void because it's a little bit of water in the middle of a giant ball of water. You have the only thing created on day one, because before day one, remember, there was no universe, nothing. Mm-hmm. We don't know fabric of the universe. It's hard for us to comprehend nothing without the universe as we know it today. But at the end of day one, the only thing that's mentioned is a huge sphere of water. We know it's a sphere because the Spirit of God hovers over the surface of the water. Mm-hmm. And that means gravity is now working, at least by the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And this giant ball of water is spinning. So at the end of day one, you have the creation of matter. But all the matter is water, H2O, in a massive ball that would later become the material that God uses for the rest of the universe. There's light. God says, let there be light. We don't know the source of the light. It's probably God himself, because in 1 John we read God is light. And in Revelation later, we don't need the sun or lamps because God provides light in the new heaven and new earth. So I think that's the best explanation. God is the source of light. And then he introduces the concept of darkness. And we have day one. We have the creation of matter, but it's all water at this point, the creation of energy, the full spectrum of light energy, and the beginning of time, day one. Those three things is what Big Bang Theory would like to explain. But Big Bang Theory has had so many problems, so many difficulties that it's falling apart under its own weight. Mm-hmm. The biblical account is day one, pure water. Day two, the only thing God says he creates is the rakia. That's the Hebrew word for the expanse or an open area between the waters. The middle part is water, and then the outer part is expanding. In between, you still have empty, what becomes outer space, period. Some people say day two, God created the atmosphere and clouds, but that doesn't really fit, especially when you get to day four. All he says is he put a separation of the waters, an empty space, rakia, and he spends an entire day of the 6 just for this. So it has to be something big. Day 3, God takes his attention to the middle ball of water, and that's where he creates land. Let the land masses appear, and then he puts some vegetation on it, some plants, but not all plants. That's when I think some of the H2O is transformed to all the periodic table of elements that we know today. Nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, silicon, gold, every element. And most of the elements are heavy elements. And secular theories of a sun exploding, creating heavy elements, they can't create anything heavier than iron or larger atoms. So God does this, though, on day 3. Day 4, God now turns his attention to that rakia, and that's the same Hebrew word for day 4. And in the rakia, he creates the greater light, the sun and the moon, and then puts the earth in the orbit of our solar system as we know it today. And then he says he creates the stars also.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine a big round space. Today it's 13 billion light years across at least. But now he fills it with the stars and the galaxies and massive clouds of dust that as we look at them in the last 100 years, they are just beautiful and colorful, very creative. But it shows just how big God is.
What a creator. Oh, my. Helmut Welk is my guest. We're going to continue our discussion on a worldwide flood, and we'll take a short break and be right back. Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. If you have questions about Jesus or want to chat with someone about it, text FAITH to 41224. That's text FAITH to 41224. And God bless you. I'm back with Helmut Welk. We're talking today about a flood, an ice age, and maybe even some climate change. We're going to get into this discussion today. The creation account, Helmut, is absolutely breathtaking. I just love the way you've described it and the way you have brought some clarity, because I used to think that, all right, when everything started, there was land under the water and he hovered over and then started doing what his work of a miraculous creation, and he separated the water and kapowie, there was the land.
Day 3 is when you get the land and the heavy elements. Before that, it only talks about water. And what's interesting is as we've looked around the universe, and I've got headlines from all kinds of secular science journals, and the headlines say, as we look around the universe, there's water everywhere. The first thing God created, the remnants of that which he transformed for everything else, there's still that out there. And in the Psalms, there's a verse, praise God, all of you that are in creation. And it begins with, on the surface of the earth, praise the heavens, and then the water above the heavens is the phrase from Psalms. The water above the heavens.
Okay, do explain what that means.
Ring of water at the edge of the universe that encloses the rakia, the expanse that God now puts the stars in on day 4. That water, that edge of water, and I could show you a little illustration. It's too bad we're on the radio, but the water on the edge is expanding, and that's Bible talks about an expanding universe. In effect, you know, he spreads the heavens like a tent. It's mentioned at least 9 or 10 times in the Old Testament, so you can't just dismiss it as poetry. It's specifically something that the heavens is expanding. Modern science in the middle 20th century has confirmed that. Confirmed 2 things. The universe had a beginning, and the universe is getting bigger. It's expanding. Both of those are straight from the Bible, biblical concepts. But the rest of Big Bang secular theory attempts to explain everything without God. And if you do things without God, you eventually get into big trouble.
Mm-hmm. Helmut, I'm curious, before we carry on here, how what you believe the percentage is of Christians who would vote for a young Earth and the percentage of Christians that would vote for an old Earth.
Well, I haven't seen any statistics, so I don't know.
I know. I mean,
I'm guessing it's less than the majority who would believe in a young Earth.
Less than the majority.
Yeah, less than.
Okay.
I know I'm in the minority, but I'm used to that. And all I can do is just say, well, here's how I see it, and here's my facts. Here's some of the things that we can look at, such as the decay of magnetic field, the amount of salt in the oceans, the recession of the moon, comets. There's a lot of reasons. People can go to creation.com, type in Age of the Earth, get 101 reasons, as written by Dr. Humphreys. So scientifically, it matches a straightforward biblical account.
Mm-hmm. But then there's going to always be people that talk about, you know, the rock that was discovered, and they did carbon dating on it, and it's 7.5 billion years old. How do you respond to people when you hear that?
I hear that people put carbon dating or hydrocarbon dating, C14, in the same sentence with millions and billions of years.
Yeah.
And if they do that, you can immediately know they don't understand carbon-14 dating.
Yeah.
Carbon-14 is only good on something that was once alive because it's in our atmosphere, it's in the food chain. and it gives a maximum age of 80,000 years, give or take, depending on your instrumentation. So carbon-14 is never used for millions of years. It's used on archaeological things that people believe are less than 100,000 years old, let's say. It cannot be used on anything a million. It would be carbon-14 dead.
Okay.
But the interesting thing is, since dinosaur bones are supposedly 14 million years old, dinosaur bones are supposedly 65 million years old, a secular paleontologist would never send a dinosaur bone to the lab for carbon-14 testing because he knows it's millions of years old. No use wasting the money on a C14 test. But every time a dinosaur bone has been sent to the lab for carbon-14 testing, it comes back in a true blind test where everybody knows how to control contamination. It comes back thousands of years old.
Wow.
And this has been done again and again. And then you combine that with the fact that we now have soft biological tissue in dinosaur bones, even a little strand of DNA. These are molecules that decay quickly. Biological material like collagen and other proteins that are in bones of land animals decays quickly, cannot last for 100,000 years. Plus think, it's in the ground going through freeze and thaw cycles. What happens if you take a piece of meat in the freezer and then take it out? Well, no good cook is going to put that meat back in the freezer again, because I need it another day now, because when you go freeze and thaw, it deteriorates, and it deteriorates quickly. And then you try to do that for 1 million years, biological tissue cannot last that long. That means these bones are not 65 million years old. Carbon-14 shows dinosaur bones are not that old, and soft biological tissue in dinosaur bones, and little strands of DNA that we have found in dinosaur bones is scientific proof that they cannot be 65 million years old. A Professor Louis Jacobs said, and he was a professor and expert on vertebrate paleontology, he said, if people and dinosaur coexisted, not to say that they live in the same place, but at the same time frame, like today, people and man-eating tigers can live in the same time period, but not in the same place. But if people and dinosaurs lived at the same time, he says you could then accommodate 6 days of creation and evolution would be vanquished. Why? Because they've lost that time column when humans supposedly evolved. So we have another example, carbon-14, which is everywhere, along with soft tissue and dinosaur bones, shows that these dinosaurs did not go extinct 65 million years ago.
Helmut Welk is my guest. Helmut, would you explain carbon-14 a little bit differently? Because I'm not sure I got it.
Okay. Carbon-14 is in the atmosphere. Everything that's alive has it, and it typically reaches an equilibrium where the carbon-14 you take in by breathing, as well as everything you eat, has carbon-14 in it. Carbon-14 can mix with oxygen to make CO2 just like normal carbon, carbon-12. And when it does, plants take it in. Plants need CO2 to live. So they take it in. You eat a salad, you're taking in more carbon-14. But then the carbon-14 that's already inside of you is decaying quickly. It has a half-life of 5,730 years. It doesn't last long, relatively long. And it's very tiny amounts. So the entire food chain, anything that's alive, trees, plants, and animals, have the same amount of carbon-14 as in the atmosphere while they're alive. When something dies, plant, or you find an old log in an archaeological dig perhaps, and you want to know how old that was, it's sent for carbon-14, and they look at how much carbon-14 is left in that sample, whether it's wood or even a piece of coal. And then they compare that to what's in the atmosphere today, because we don't know how much carbon-14 was in the atmosphere when that tree was cut down or an animal died. So they just assume, because we know the planet is millions and billions of years old, Dr. Libby, who invented carbon-14, said, well, it's going to reach an equilibrium within 30,000 years. So everything is the same as what's in the atmosphere. So when you the instrumentation and everything is wonderful about it. But when you do the final calculation, you have to have something to compare what's left in your sample of C14 versus was in the air when it died or was cut down.
Mm-hmm.
So we just assume it was the same as today. And that's why you get ages of dinosaur bones that come back 22,000 years, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And I have many examples of that, 16,000 years. Now, that does two things. First, it wipes out millions of years and billions of years. Okay? That is clear. The second thing, Doden, is people will say, well, why does it say 22,000 years if you believe the Earth is only 6,000 years old? Well, that's because of that assumption. And we know, we have scientific proof, it's written in science journals, that the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere is still increasing. It has not reached the equilibrium point that Dr. Libby said should take 30,000 years. It is not there yet, which is, by the way, an indicator the atmosphere can't be more than 30,000 years old. But if you now understand that when this tree was cut down several thousand years ago, or this bone of an animal died, and it's losing carbon-14 and not taking any more in, so it's always going down, but then you compare it to today's atmosphere, you're overstating the amount of time that's passed.
Gotcha.
But if you assume that it only had half as much carbon-14, there's a lot of evidence for that, then instead of coming back, 14,000 years, it might very well come back 4,000 years when you correct for that.
Okay, that's a very interesting point, and I think it's very helpful. So let me take a little break. Helmut Welk is my guest, and we're talking about the worldwide flood and all the evidence about it. And we're going to come back and continue our discussion on the Ice Age. And so we'll be back in just a minute.
It's the afternoon show with Bill Arnold. Prime time, drive time. Let's get it started. Jump in your car. What's for dinner? It's the afternoon show with Bill Arnold.
I'm so glad to have Helmut Welk with me today. We're talking about the worldwide flood and the evidence surrounding it. Helmut, let's talk about the Ice Age. This is a fascinating period where the temperature of the Earth's surface and atmosphere did something pretty amazing, didn't it?
It really did. And we have a lot of evidence that there really was an ice age. But, people who believe in millions and billions of years tend to stretch that out, and they've got different mechanisms that they try to recreate an ice age in that all give them difficulty. And so they say, well, maybe there were many ice ages. They used to say there were like 6 or 7 ice ages, or now they're up to dozens, because they think the entire Earth went through various cooling periods. And to some extent, that's true. But what you really need, you need 2 things to get an ice age. You need not just cooler atmosphere and land masses that accumulate lots of snow on, but you need a source for all that snow, heavy snowfall all winter long. And the only way to do that is warm oceans. So none of the secular models do that because they deny a worldwide flood. But we know the flood during Noah's time begins with the fountains of the deep opening up. Superheated water coming from underground, heated by all the lava and so on, and shoots up into massive amounts. And in those days, much more. It would make today's Old Faithful geyser look like a drinking fountain.
Right.
So that's where you have the continent. Everybody agrees there was one continent. Some even have a name, Pangaea. it breaks up. Superheated water, you have gigantic volcanoes, which we have lots of evidence going off. And all of that generates hot water, which gives you a lot of evaporation, which, by the way, gives you the source of rain for 40 days. But then the oceans, with this continued volcanic activity, continue to heat the water for centuries.
Wow.
Maybe not the entire time heating it, but then it has to cool down over centuries. So you have very hot oceans relatively today. Some people estimate 30 to 40 degrees warmer than the average is today. So you have all that evaporation. That's what you need to get an ice age. It has to have a source of the water, because cold air alone does not give you lots of snow. Just think of cold days and nights in Minnesota. When it's really cold, there's not much moisture in the air, is there?
No.
And you don't get much snow and rain until some wet air comes in with high moisture. So the mechanism for an ice age is from a flood that produced warm oceans, but you also have these volcanoes shooting lots of aerosols into the air, and probably a lot of people are now pointing to evidence of big comets and meteors hitting the Earth, which these explosions would shoot dust and aerosols even higher into the atmosphere and the stratosphere.
Whoa. And
it would linger longer. Volcanoes continue to go off, and then you have less sunlight hitting the land, hitting the Earth to warm it up. But you still have warmer oceans, which give the evaporations, which give you moist air. As that moist air comes over the cooler land, which doesn't get as much sunlight as normal, and it just dumps snow, and that's what you need. Lots of snow, moisture falling, freezing rain, building up that cannot come close to melting in the summer. And if that happens for centuries, you get an ice age.
Mm.
And only the biblical model fits. And I've got plenty of quotes that I'll talk about that show secular model people who try to understand an ice age. They admit it's embarrassing. We have no idea how this happens. They try it, but then they do get sometimes heavy snowfalls or in the cold air in their models, their weather computer models, but the snow falls in the wrong areas. We have evidence where the glaciation, where the snow falls accumulated. And it only fits the biblical model with a flood and warm oceans.
Mm-hmm.
But then the land is cooled for a few centuries, and it takes time now to build it up. So the Ice Age probably really got going 200 years after the flood. And that's about the time we have the Tower of Babel incident. And so the Tower of Babel, people are collecting still in the Middle East, which is a moderate climate, nice, not quite as dry as it is today. But they start saying, we're going to try to be like God again. They rebel against God. God specifically said to the generations after Noah, spread out. Animals probably started too. But the people wanted to build a tower, and we're going to be like God. The pride of man comes in again. God disperses them with the language breakup. And so people spread across the earth. Now, by this time, it's going to take them maybe another 100 years before they get to the edge of Siberia. And by now, with a full-blown ice age, you have so much water tied up in the ice caps and in glaciation and big fields of snow inland, but not necessarily on the coast, because the coast, remember, is next to a warm ocean, even the Arctic Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
But people can then wander along those coastlines where you have what even today we call them rainforests. If you go to the coast of Alaska, they talk about the rainforest. It doesn't get as much snow, but it gets lots of moisture. It doesn't freeze as the inland does. So the same thing. Animals can go across a land bridge. There's so much water tied up in that ice. We have lower ocean levels. And if you look at a map, you can find out, and people even have articles about people even living on what's now called the Bering Strait, a huge landmass that when the water is low enough between Alaska and Siberia, there's a lot of land there, and people could come across, stay close to the oceans where you have grasses and even trees growing, which we have evidence of. Woolly mammoths went along this path, other creatures. I even just saw an article from a scientist in Japan. They've discovered a dinosaur that has remains in the same area on both sides of Siberia and Alaska. So they're saying even dinosaurs used this land bridge. People came down, and that's how you get the settlements in North America of people and animals. And as the water receded, it's been estimated that it lasted about 500 years once it really got going. So we're now talking about 700 years or plus or minus after the flood. The water begins to melt, and the melting of the Ice Age causes a lot of things that we could talk about if we had another hour. But let's just say that the ocean levels now are coming back up. The land bridges are closing, because before that you could walk from the Middle East to Australia on dry land, from Europe to Ireland. But now the water is coming up, and what's especially interesting, we have found thousands of mammoth tusks on islands on the coast of Siberia, off the coast. What are they doing there? Well, think of the animals being on this broad land bridge, and as the water is slowly coming up over a few years, maybe a decade or more, they're going to high ground. And if a lot of them start heading towards these high ground, which become an island, they eventually get trapped. And so you've got these islands, which are now in the Arctic Ocean, and we find thousands of mammoth tusks because they all had to collect there until they finally, too, succumbed to the cold and death and lack of food.
Okay, that's quite interesting. I have not been down this road yet, trying to put all this together. This is fascinating. Helmut Welk is my guest. And Helmut, I appreciate the introduction to the Ice Age. Now, I just want to back up for a second. When the flood began, and you talk about warm water, is it most likely that there was a fracture at the bottom of the ocean where all that water came from to flood the earth faster than normal?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so
that's those fountains of the deep.
Yeah.
The source of the water, most of the water for the flood came from underground.
Okay.
And even today, we have lots of water underground, don't we?
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
We can dig a well and find water.
Yeah, I think there was a trivia question, what is hotter, the center of the earth or the surface of the sun? And you kind of just did the scientific look to the side. What does that mean? Because people can't see that.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that particular question. I imagine the surface of the sun is still going to be hotter, but
yeah, but I mean, I think the fact that the center of the earth is that hot, it could generate incredibly hot water, right?
It can.
Yes,
and that's why we have geysers still today.
Yeah. Okay.
And why Mount St. Helens exploded. It was water in the rock that got sealed in, and then got in touch with the magma, got heated, and you had an immense steam explosion when it exploded in 1980.
All right. We'll take a little break and come back. Helmut Welk is our guest, and we're talking today about a worldwide flood. And we all know as believers there was a flood because Genesis tells us there was. But we're going to be in conversations with non-believers that are going to call us cuckoo because, come on, the earth is millions and millions and millions of years old, and I think there's plenty of deep-thinking people that say, well, I believe that there could be an old creation, but still, people have been on this earth for 10,000 years or 6,000 years, so there's some people that are a hybrid of both. So anyway, hey, I don't know if you've downloaded the Faith Radio app. Go to your app store and check it out. I have to say, it's a beautiful app. I've got mine on my iPhone, and when you download it, you just can't believe how pretty it is. And you open it up, and it's very easy to navigate your way through it. And you can listen to Faith Radio live, or you can just check out the podcast. It doesn't matter where you go. You can download if you've got that Faith Radio app. So give it a try. And if you don't like it, it's easy just to delete it off your phone, but I'm pretty sure you'll keep it. We'll take a break. Be right back.
This is Susie Larson, host of Susie Larson Live. Maybe you have a loved one that you've been praying for years, and they still haven't trusted Jesus. Or maybe you have a loved one who once had a vibrant faith, but has since walked away. If this is true for you, know this: you're not alone. God sees you, He loves you, and He knows about the heartache you feel. And we care about it too. I've recorded 15 audio clips to encourage your soul. Text the word HEART to 877-933-2484. I'm
back with Helmut Welk, and you if you did not take your brain juice today, you're going to want to take it, because this is not an easy topic, but you're handling it beautifully, Helmut. So I appreciate all the information. I just have to listen more carefully than I've listened in a long time, because this is a kind of new information to me, hearing about the worldwide flood and all the scientific data and evidence that comes along with it. Maybe you would give me 4 quick reasons for the flood.
Okay. To have a worldwide flood, you would want evidence that the ocean waters flooded over all of the land.
Mm-hmm.
What do we have today? We have sedimentary rock covering almost all of the earth. We've got some igneous rock, granites that poke through, but the entire earth is covered by rocks, sedimentary rocks laid down by water, and are full of dead things, fossils. And 95% of all fossils are marine plants and animals, top to bottom. So that's a big indicator right there, and that is worldwide. You can see the sedimentary rocks everywhere, even on the tops of the mountains. Why are there fossilized clams on top of Mount Everest? Because those rocks were laid down underwater. Now, secularists would say it took millions of years to push that up, but that's not how it looks. It looks like it was actually pushed up relatively recently, because it's just much too jagged.
Mm-hmm.
Millions of years of erosion would remove all that. So we have marine fossils on top of all the mountains all over the earth. So it covered all the land. Second, you have this rapid burial of creatures and plants. The only way to get a fossil is to have it buried quickly and deeply. If an animal dies in the forest, it does not turn into a fossil at all.
It decays.
It decays, gets eaten, and even the little bits of antlers, let's say, and the bones get consumed by worms and other creatures, and it decays back to the dust. So to get a fossil, and we have got some pristine fossils that had to be buried quickly. We have fossils of a big fish eating a little fish. It got buried so quickly the big guy didn't have time to finish lunch. And many more like that. So rapid burial of creatures and plants. And then we have widespread, rapidly deposited layers. If you go to Grand Canyon and notice some of the different layers there, one interpretation would be that they were laid down in successive waves of the flood. Remember, it took almost 6 months before everything was covered. And then you've got some layers that look like they were laid down while it was underwater, like ocean sand and sediments, underwater sand dunes. We have all evidence of that. But each layer is distinct and has like almost a knife edge between it. Secularists would like to say that there were millions, hundreds of millions of years in some case between them, and that the ocean went down and then it came back up again. They have these cycles that they try to do to spread everything out. But if that was true, if you had millions of years between these layers, you would have sure signs of vegetation, you would have erosion, you'd have gullies, you'd have valleys, river things, all kinds of things that could happen in a few million years, just like it does today in a few thousand years. So it'd be even worse, but there's no signs of it. Rapid, widespread, rapidly deposited layers is what we have solid evidence of. And then one of my favorites, there's others, but let's finish with this one. Bent rock layers that defy millions of years. In Grand Canyon, and I put my hands on it myself, you can go see huge layers, hundreds of feet high, all these sediments that supposedly took millions of years to be laid down, together even with other layers, go straight across, flat like you'd expect water deposits to be. Water seeks its own level. But then there was an earthquake or a fault, and those rock layers go almost vertical, and then continue straight on again, further down a little bit. Bent rock. Can you bend rock? Can you take a piece of sandstone or limestone and bend it?
Well, I'm pretty strong, so.
You're strong. You could break it maybe, but it's not going to bend.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
The only way to do that, and these deep layers, is while they're still soft. They're still soft after Noah's flood. It's like a whole bunch of layers of modeling clay that's soft top to bottom, and you can form it. You could bend it, make a wave shape or whatever you like, and then it hardens over time. Dry it out. And then you can't bend it anymore. It'll break. And these rock layers, as scientists have studied them and taken samples, we have proof positive they are still sedimentary rock. If supposedly heat and pressure bent it underground over millions of years, it would then change to metamorphic rock. But there's no sign of metamorphic processes going on. It's still sedimentary rock. So this is these bent rock layers, which are massive, and I've seen them in Mexico, and I hear they're in Israel, other parts of the world, showing that these layers were all soft, laid down recently, and then bent together. If you want to get into the details and follow a very major research project in a documentary, the people who did Is Genesis History, a wonderful documentary movie, it was in theaters when it first came out, and you can still get the DVD and see it online. But it's now called Mountains After the Flood. It came out just end of last year, and it documents all the scientific research to show that these layers were recent. So I think that's one of my favorite. Bent rock is one of my favorite proofs of Noah's flood being relatively recent and massive, and there's no other explanation.
All right, Helmut, is the climate changing all the time?
Well, absolutely.
That's what the answer I was going to give.
Did you notice that?
I have noticed that. Yes, I live in Minnesota too.
So we talked about the Ice Age. The Ice Age ended. The glaciers and the big sheets of ice started melting. And for a while, they melted rather quickly as the aerosols in the air cleared up and the sun could warm the land. And then the oceans come back to a more ambient temperature, not as hot, so there's less evaporation during the winter. And you finally get close to where we are today, some stability. But we still have remnants of everything. We have remnants of the big earthquakes, of volcanoes. They're all smaller, and we still have rain, thank God.
Yes.
So water will condense, and still we have that. But you don't get the amount. And so the glaciers have been melting for centuries. So when people told me about all these things that are happening under global warming is suddenly happening, and this started in the year 2000s where it really got going, late 90s. They were saying, yeah, look at this happening. But then you look at what's really happening, and you see signs of glaciation that have been gone now for a couple hundred years, well before the Industrial Revolution, saying, wait a minute, these glaciers and stuff have been melting a long time, and in the last 50 years, it's really slowed down. They said Mount Kilimanjaro would have no ice or snow on it by the year 2010 or something, before today, and it still does. In fact, we've had snowstorms in the Middle East that we haven't seen for 50 years, and yet it's still coming. So, yeah, there's been some change, but these things have happened well before the current industrial age. And is carbon-14 a pollutant? Look around you. Do you love trees? Go up to a tree and breathe on it, and it will hug you back. Because they need CO2.
They do.
CO2 is not a pollutant. It's the basis of life. Without CO2, you have no photosynthesis.
Right.
And we would all die.
Yeah. Helmut, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a delight meeting you. I appreciate all of your content and the way in which you helped me understand it, and I hope the audience learned as well. If you want to learn more about Helmut, you can go to tccsa.tc. We want to pray for you. We all need prayer. We would love to pray for you. The Faith Radio team is serious about prayer, and we pray for specific listener requests every week. Share your prayer requests with us anonymously and securely on our website at myfaithradio.com. We will take a short break and be back with more in just a minute. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.